Welcome to a Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction fiscal microwebinar on 21st Century Community Learning Centers Budget Basics. The primary objectives for this webinar are that you will be able to 1. Understand the role of the fiscal agent, 2. Identify the correct budget form for completing a CLC budget, 3. Understand how to complete the CLC budget form, 4. Understand the basic criteria CLC consultants consider for budget approvals. To begin, it's important to know your responsibilities as the fiscal agent for the Nita M. Lowry 21st Century Community Learning Centers Grant, otherwise known as the CLC Grant. The fiscal agent is the entity that provides fiscal management, accounting, and reporting services on behalf of the organization receiving CLC funding. More specifically, this includes submitting budgets, budget change requests, and fiscal reimbursement claims, issuing grant-funded subcontracts, managing all purchasing, and maintaining fiscal records in accordance with applicable federal and state guidelines. We will discuss more about each of these topics as we move through this webinar. Let's begin with an overview of the CLC budget. First, you can find the correct form to complete a budget, PI 9580 IV-B budget, more commonly referred to as the CLC budget form, on DPI's CLC website under Current Grantee Resources. You must use this form. Please be aware that converting the form to another file type, such as a Google document, may interfere with the form's calculation functions, and you will be required to resubmit the form. Please work with your business office to complete any financial forms, including this one. The CLC budget has two sections. 1. The budget summary, and 2. The budget justification that supports the budget summary. Again, be sure to collaborate with your business office in developing the CLC budget. Additionally, when determining items to be funded, consider the purposes of the CLC grant and note that supplanting is prohibited. As a reminder, the three primary purposes of the CLC grant are to 1. Provide academic enrichment programming, 2. Provide youth development activities, and 3. Provide programming for the adult family members of CLC students. Let's take a closer look at the budget justification. The items on the budget justification pages provide specific information regarding expenditures, and it is broken down into 5 areas. To complete the budget justification, you will need to list and identify your purchases in the appropriate area. Note that the first row in each area has been completed for you as an example. In the first area, the personnel summary, list all personnel to be paid for this project. Do not include contracted personnel employed by other agencies in this section. Contracted personnel employed by other agencies should be included in the next area, the purchase services summary. The 6 parts to the personnel summary area include A. Woofer function code, B. Personnel position or title, C. Purpose and or justification, D. Project full-time equivalent or FTE, or limited term employee or LTE, percent of time, E. Dates of service to be provided, and F. The amount of salary and fringe funded by the CLC grant. Woofer in the first column, A, stands for the Wisconsin Uniform Financial Accounting Requirements. It provides a uniform financial and accounting structure for public elementary and secondary schools in the state of Wisconsin. This column is not required to be completed, but it may help you when completing the budget summary later. In the second column, B, Personnel Position or Title, lists all employees of the fiscal agent to be paid from CLC funds. If a vacancy exists which will be filled, indicate vacant. In the third column, C, Purpose and or justification, include the quantity of positions, hours per week, and weeks per year the position or positions will be filled, as well as a brief justification for the position. Refer to the italicized example for help. Under the fourth column, D, Project FTE or LTE percent of time, list the type of employment and percentage of full-time the position will be. In the example provided, A 50% LTE means that the CLC program coordinator will work 20 hours per week. Another way to think of this is to enter 100% or 1.00 to identify the percentage of a person's time funded by the grant at full time. Under the fifth column E, dates services to be provided, list the dates during the current fiscal year that the position will be employed. In the final sixth column, F, salary and fringe, include any salary and/or fringe benefits paid for the position with CLC monies. The second area is the purchase services summary. A purchase service is a service that is contracted for rather than being provided directly by the grantee. In this section, you include payment for services rendered by personnel who are not on the payroll of the fiscal agent, or for services that the fiscal agent obtains from other private or public agencies. It also includes public transportation, employee travel, and more. The 6 parts to the purchase summary area include A, woofer function code, B, type of service purchased, C, purpose or justification, D, dates of service to be provided, E, specific agency or vendor or supplier, if known, and F, the amount funded by the CLC grant. The woofer function code column, A, is again not required, but completing it may help you with the budget summary later. In the second column, B, type of service purchased, provide the general purchase category, such as pupil transportation, personal services, which are support services performed by individuals who are not CLC employees or other public or private entities with specialized skills and knowledge, employee travel for professional development, etc. Under the third column, C, purpose or justification, provide any information necessary to explain the expenditure. This information may include a specific goal of the CLC program, cost detail, specific service being provided by a contracted entity, etc. Under the fourth column, D, dates service to be provided, list the dates during the current fiscal year that the contracted services will be provided. Under the fifth column, E, list the specific agency, vendor, or supplier providing the purchase service. If the agency or vendor has not yet been identified, or if the contract has not yet been secured, write to be determined. In the final sixth column, F, list the amount of the purchase service paid for with CLC monies. The third area is the non-capital object summary. Non-capital objects refers to supplies and equipment costing less than $5,000 per unit. Here you include supplies, apparel, technology, instructional media, and more. The 5 parts to the non-capital object summary area include A, woofer function code, B, quantity, C, item name, D, purpose and/or justification, and E, the amount funded by the CLC grant. The woofer function code column, A, is again not required. In the second column, B, quantity, provide the number of objects per line item for which you are budgeting. If you are budgeting for a general category, as in the example here for recreational athletic equipment, write varies. Under the third column, C, item name, identify the proposed budget item. Provide enough information so that a CLC grant consultant can understand what is included in the proposed item or item category, and so that they can determine if the cost is reasonable, necessary, and allowable. If not enough detail is provided, you will be contacted by a consultant for further information. To again use the example provided, note that recreational athletic equipment is further detailed. Under the fourth column, D, purpose and/or justification, provide any information necessary to explain the expenditure. Ideally, purchases should align with the CLC's purposes, goals, and outcomes. Under the fifth column, E, amount funded by the 21st Century Community Learning Center program, list the amount of the non-capital object paid for with CLC monies. The capital object summary is the fourth area. Capital objects are those items that cost $5,000 or more for a single item, and these are generally unallowable. Vehicle leasing, however, falls under the capital object summary area and is allowable. The 5 parts of the capital object summary area are identical to the non-capital object summary section, and you can follow the same guidelines for its completion. The 5th and final area is the other objects summary. In this area, you would include such expenses as field trip admission fees. The 5 parts to the other object summary area are identical to the non-capital objects and capital object summary sections, and you can follow the same guidelines for its completion. If you are unclear as to which of the 5 budget sections an item falls, please contact your CLC consultant or the grant specialist. Contact information is on the CLC webpage and will be provided at the end of this webinar. The second part of the CLC budget is the budget summary page. The budget summary captures all the individual expenditures described in the budget justification and summarizes the budget justification information across woofer function codes, which is the first column of the budget summary. Woofer functions are organized by the purpose of the spending, not what the particular expenditure or recipient is. The 3 woofer functions include 1. Instruction. Instruction expenses are those dealing directly with the interaction between instructional staff and students and/or families. 2. Support services, pupil and instructional staff services. Pupil and instruction staff services expenses are those that facilitate and enhance instructional or other components of the grant. This category includes staff development, supervision, and coordination of grant activities. And 3. Support services administration. Administration expenses include general, building, business, central services administration, and insurances expenses. Woofer functions, or general expenditure categories, are further broken down into woofer objects, the second column on the form. The woofer object is the type of cost, meaning that you are buying and whom you are buying it from, whereas the function is the area or purpose it's for. The first column to be completed and the third column on the budget summary is the amount requested column. You will need to manually enter in your proposed expenditures, as the form does not automatically pull the information from the budget justification pages. For the purpose of the budget summary, you need to make sure that CLC grant monies are in the appropriate woofer function or general category and woofer object, and that they mirror what you have included in the budget justification. If you're uncertain how to match your budget justification and budget summary by these titles and categories, look at your woofer numbers. Please visit the DPI website to learn more about woofer or contact your CLC consultant or grant specialist with questions. The final optional part of the budget summary page to be completed is the indirect cost approved rates cell. Indirect costs are part of the system by which a subrecipient can determine its cost of doing business and recover that amount from the CLC grant. Examples of such costs are accounting, auditing, payroll, personnel, and budgeting. The local education agency, otherwise known as the LEA, or other agency may have an indirect cost rate that has been negotiated with the state and that determines the percentage of indirect costs that can be allocated to the grant. You can determine if your agency has an indirect cost rate and what that rate is by visiting the DPI webpage and searching for indirect costs. If you choose to claim indirect costs, you cannot exceed the restricted rate as posted, but you can claim less than that percent. Note that a cost may not be assigned to a federal award as a direct cost if the same type of cost has already been allocated as an indirect cost. Once you enter the approved rate, or less than the approved rate, the indirect cost will be automatically calculated for you. So what happens after you submit the form? Budgets go through several stages of approval based on a number of criteria, including whether 1. The cost is necessary to meet the program goals and objectives, 2. The cost is reasonable and necessary, and 3. The cost is allowed under the specific federal and state CLC grant program guidelines. The first step in the approval process is that your CLC consultant will review the budget and compare the proposed expenses to your grant application's program plan and goals, looking for alignment. For example, if a proposed cost includes a large allocation in non-capital objects to purchase STEM equipment, but there is no mention of STEM in the site's program plan, you can expect follow-up from a DPI consultant. On the other hand, if the program plan focuses on mindfulness and there are costs associated with purchase services to bring in appropriate staff to facilitate social and emotional related activities, these expenses will likely be approved. If the proposed budget adequately reflects the site's program plan and goals, your CLC consultant will then review the budget's line items to determine if they are reasonable and necessary. A cost is reasonable if, in its nature and amount, it does not exceed that which would be incurred by a prudent person or in the absence of federal funds. A cost is necessary if it meets an important program objective, meaning it must address an existing need. Let's consider the tenet of reasonable and necessary with the proposal to attend a conference for professional development. Specifically, a conference is defined as a meeting, retreat, seminar, workshop, or event for the purpose of disseminating technical information that is reasonable for successful performance under the federal award. A conference, including the state of Wisconsin's annual CLC conference or a national conference on out-of-school time, such as beyond school hours, would be deemed reasonable and necessary. A conference on standard-based grading, however, would not, as it is a training applicable only to day school. Allowable costs refers to items of costs that in general can be funded with CLC federal grant dollars as long as the cost fits within the framework of responsible stewardship of these public funds. This means that allowable costs include only those expenses incurred for CLC grant purposes as mentioned earlier. Again, these include academic enrichment, youth development, and family engagement, as well as indirect costs. A few of the more commonly approved allowable costs are provided for your reference on the current slide. Note that if the budget charges 100% of an expenditure to the CLC grant, you must ensure that the CLC program is receiving the entire benefit of these costs. Using one of the examples above, that of costs or family events, consider that the budget allocates monies for 100 participants in a parenting program. 75 adult family members are the parents and guardians of CLC participants, and 25 participants are the parents and guardians of non-CLC students. This is not allowable. The costs for those 25 participants who are not the parents and guardians of CLC students would not be considered an allowable cost. In other words, if a family event is open to families who do not have a child enrolled in the CLC program, the CLC grant cannot be the only funding source. A common budget area that is generally allowable is the purchase of technology. In addition to the typical review pattern of looking for alignment, whether the proposed purchase is reasonable and necessary, and whether the proposed expenditure is allowable, technology purchases also require the completion of the Technology Assurances Form. You can access the form on DPI's CLC website under Current Grantee Resources. The direct link is provided on the current slide as well. The steps in completing the form are to ensure that 1. The purchase of technology is not being made in the final year of a grant cycle, as this is unallowable. 2. At least a 1 to 15 teacher to student ratio exists during use of the technology with students. 3. The CLC program has an inventory system which exclusively allows the use of purchased technology in the CLC program and tracks its use. 4. Technology must be stored for safety and to prevent theft. And 5. All staff members using the technology are trained to do so. You must then provide details on the proposed technology purchase, including what the purchase is, the quantity, the cost per item, who will use the technology, the purpose of use, and how the purchase supports the objectives and goals of your CLC program plan. As with all budgeted items, make sure your proposed expenditure is approved prior to any purchase. As a reminder, subcontracting is generally allowed and it falls under purchase services on the CLC budget. And as with technology purchases, there are a few additional criteria DPI consultants consider in addition to alignment, reasonable, necessary, and allowable costs prior to approving the allocation of CLC funds to subcontracts. Specifically, the maximum amount you may contract for is 95% of the award. 5% must be retained by the fiscal agent for oversight, and the fiscal agent needs to identify someone associated with the fiscal agent as one of the primary contacts for DPI communication. Additionally, if subcontracting with a single agency for 25% or more of the award, applicants will be asked to provide a detailed budget of those expenses. If a cost is not allowable, reasonable, and/or necessary, and/or doesn't align with the CLC's grant purposes and site's program plan, the cost is unallowable and will not be approved. A few of the more commonly submitted unallowable costs are provided for your reference on the current slide. If you ever have questions about whether a particular expense is allowable or not, please reach out to your CLC consultant or the grant specialist. As mentioned, the purchase of food is generally allowable, unless it is a part of curriculum supplies or a light snack for family events. As mentioned, the purchase of food is generally unallowable unless it is part of curriculum supplies or a light snack for family events. There do exist, however, several resources for you to explore for reimbursable snacks, and those are listed on the current slide. Learn more about these resources on the DPI School Nutrition website. A final idea necessary to understand allowable and unallowable costs in CLC budgets is the fact that CLC funds can be used only to supplement but not supplant any federal or non-federal funds used to support current programs. What do these terms mean exactly? Supplementing with the CLC grant means that CLC monies are used to provide new services or to expand services that were already being provided using other funds. Supplanting with the CLC grant means that CLC monies are used to replace other funding sources used to provide services. As the CLC's fiscal agent, you are responsible for monitoring program expenditures and must compare these to budgeted amounts. When necessary, you may need to complete a budget change request. A budget change request or a budget revision is a proposed adjustment for when your organization reallocates funding to make allowances for unexpected or other expenses. All adjustments must be justified and approved by the CLC consultants prior to initiating the activity or making a purchase tied to the change request. To learn more about budget changes, including how to complete a budget change request, visit the CLC Current Grantee Resources webpage and look under Trainings. There you will find another micro-webinar on completing a budget change request. Fiscal agents are also responsible for completing fiscal reimbursement claims. This is the means by which funds are made available under the federal CLC grant program to you, the subrecipient, through a reimbursement process. Grant reimbursements are completed by submitting the appropriate form PI 1086 directly to DPI's business office. The link to this form is on the current slide. Again, you can find a micro-webinar on completing a fiscal reimbursement claim form on the CLC Current Grantee Resources webpage. Finally, the fiscal agent must maintain sound record-keeping procedures, not only for potential staff transition periods, but also to comply with federal requirements. Explicitly, the federal government requires CLCs to maintain records for 3 years after a program ends, while the IRS requires that you maintain your fiscal records for 7 total years. This micro-webinar on CLC Budget Basics is now complete. Should you have any questions, please contact a CLC consultant or the CLC Grant Specialist, or visit the CLC website.